Ladies and gentlemen, today we finished the story of Decemus Scotti, or at least I believe we finished the story of Decemus Scotti. I don't think there's another story or like series or whatnot about the man, but I could be mistaken. I could be mistaken. Yeah, today we at least finished the Argonian Account with volumes 3 or book 3 and book 4. Yeah, so hope you can sit back, relax, and, I don't know, maybe get a bottle of scotch with you. The Argonian Account, Book 3. Decemus Scotti was supposed to be in Gideon, a thoroughly imperialized city in southern Blackmarsh, arranging business dealings to improve commerce in the province on behalf of Lord Vinek's building commission and its clients. Instead, he was in a half-submerged, rotten little village called Hicksinoig, where he knew no one, except for a drug smuggler named Shero Gemellus. Gemellus was not at all perturbed that the merchant caravan had gone north instead of south. He even let Scotti share his bucket of trode, tiny little crunchy fish he had brought from the villagers. Scotti would have preferred them cooked, or at any rate dead, but Gemellus blithely explained that dead cooked trod are deadly poison. If I were where I was supposed to be, Scotti pouted, putting one of the wriggled little creatures in his mouth. God, I am struggling to read today. I could be having a roast and some cheese and a glass of wine. I sell moon sugar in the north, and buy it in the south, he shrugged. You have to be more flexible, my friend. My only business is in Gideon, Scotti frowned. Well, you have a couple choices, replied the smuggler. You could just stay here. Most villages in Argonia don't stay put for very long, and there's a good chance Hicksinoig will drift right down to the gates of Gideon. Wow, why does every city in these stories move? Might take you a month or two, probably the easiest way. That'd put me far behind schedule. Next opinion, you could join up with the caravan again, said Gemellus. They might be going in the right direction this time, and they might not get stuck in the mud, and they might not be all murdered by Naga highwaymen. Not tempting, Scotti frowned. Any other ideas? Ride the routes, the Underground Express, Gemellus grinned. Follow me. Scotti followed Gemellus out of the village and into a copse of trees shrouded by veils of wispy moss. The smuggler kept his eye on the ground, poking at the viscous mud intermittently. Finally, he found a spot which triggered a mass of big oily bubbles to rise to the surface. Perfect, he said. Now the important thing is not to panic. The express will take you due south. That's the wintertide migration, and you'll know you're near Gideon when you see a lot of red clay. Just don't panic, and when you see a mass of bubbles, that's a breathing hole you can use to get out. Scotti looked at Gemellus blankly. The man was talking perfect gibberish. What? Gemellus took Scotti by the shoulder and positioned him on top of the mass of bubbles. You stand right here. Scotti sank quickly into the mud, staring at the smuggler, horror-struck. And remember to wait till you see the red clay, and then the next time you see bubbles, push up. The more Scotti wiggled to get free, the faster he sunk. The mud enveloped Scotti to his neck, and he continued staring, unable to articulate anything but a noise like "oog." And don't panic at the idea that you're being digested. You could live in a rootworm's belly for months. Scotti took one last panicked gasp of air and closed his eyes before he disappeared into the mud. The clerk felt a warmth he hadn't expected all around him. When he opened his eyes, he found that he was entirely surrounded by a translucent goo and was traveling rapidly forward, southward, gliding through the mud as if it were air, skipping along an intricate network of roots. Scotti felt confusion and euphoria in equal measures, madly rushing forward through an alien environment of darkness, spinning around and over the thick, fibrous tentacles of the trees. It was as if he were high in the sky at midnight, not deep beneath the swamp in the Underground Express. This is a very strange place, but could be kind of cool to see in like a fast travel mechanism if we ever get to explore Blackmarsh. Looking up slightly at the massive root structure above, Scotti saw something wiggle past. An 8-foot-long, armless, legless, colorless, boneless, eyeless, nearly shapeless creature riding the roots. Something dark was inside of it, and as it came closer, Scotti could see it was an Argonian man. He waved, and the disgusting creature the Argonian was in flattened slightly and rushed onward. Gemelus's words began to reappear in Scotty's mind at this sight. The wintertide migration, earhole, you're being digested. These were the phrases that danced around as if trying to find some place to live in a brain which was highly resistant to them coming in. But there was no other way to look at the situation. Scotti had gone from eating living fish to being eaten alive as a way of transport. He was in one of those worms. What a fascinating land, huh? Scotti made an executive decision to faint, of course. He awoke in stages, having a beautiful dream of being held in a woman's warm embrace, smiling and opening his eyes. The reality of where he really was rushed over him. The creature was still rushing madly, blindingly forward, gliding over roots, but it was no longer like a flight through the night sky. Now it was like the sky at sunrise, in pinks and reds. Scotti remembered Gemelus telling him to look for the red clay, and he would be near Gideon. The next thing he had to find was the bubbles. There were no bubbles anywhere. Though the inside of the worm was still warm and comfortable, Scotti felt the weight of the earth all around him. Just don't panic, Gemelus had said, but it was one thing to hear that advice, and quite another to take it. He began to squirm, and the creature began to move faster at the increased pressure from within. Suddenly, Scotti saw it ahead of him, a slim spire of bubbles rising up through the mud from some underground stream, straight up through the roots to the surface above him. The moment the root worm went through it, Scotti pushed with all of his might upward, bursting through the creature's thin skin. The bubbles pushed Scotti up quickly, and before he could blink, he was popping up out of the red slushy mud. 2 gray Argonians were standing under a tree nearby, holding a net. They looked in Scotty's direction with polite curiosity. In their net, Scotti noticed, were several squirming, furry, rat-like creatures. While he addressed them, another fell out of the tree. Though Scotti had not been educated in this practice, he recognized fishing when he saw it. "Excuse me, lads," Scotti said jovially. "I was wondering if you'd point me in the direction of Gideon." The Argonians introduced themselves as Drawing Flame and Furl of Fresh Leaves, and looked at one another, puzzling over the question. "Who do you seek?" asked Furl of Fresh Leaves. "I believe his name is," said Scotti, trying to remember the contents of his long-gone file of Black Marsh contacts in Gideon. "Argonian Right Foot Rock?" Drawing Flame nodded. "For 5 gold, show you the way. Just east, in plantation east of Gideon. Very nice." Scotti thought that the best business he had heard of in 2 days, and handed Drawing Flames the 5 septims. The Argonians led Scotti onto a muddy ribbon of road that passed through the reeds, and soon revealed the bright blue expanse of Topol Bay, far to the west. Scotti looked around at the magnificent walled estates, where bright crimson blossoms sprang forth from the very dirt of the walls, and surprised himself by thinking, "This is very pretty." The road ran parallel to a fast-moving stream, running eastward from Topol Bay. It was called the Oncobra River, he was told. It ran deep into Black Marsh, to the very dark heart of the province. Peeking past the gates to the plantations east of Gideon, Scotti saw that few of the fields were tended. Most had rotten crops from harvests past still clinging to wilted vines, orchards of desolate, leafless trees. The Argonian serfs who worked the fields were thin, weak, near death, more like haunting spirits than creatures of life and reason. 2 hours later, as the 3 continued their trudge east, the estates were still impressive, at least from a distance. The road was still solid if weedy, but Scotti was irritated, horrified by the field workers in the agricultural state, and no longer charitable towards the area. How much further? Furl of Fresh Leaves and Drawing Flame looked at one another, as if that question was something that hadn't occurred to them. "Argonian is east?" Furl of Fresh Leaves pondered. "Near or far?" Drawing Flame shrugged non-committally and said to Scotti, "For 5 gold, show you way. Just east is plantation. Very nice." "You don't have any idea, do you?" Scotti cried. "Why couldn't you tell me that in the first place when I might have asked someone else?" Around the bend up ahead, there was the sound of hoofbeats, a horse coming closer. Scotti began to walk towards the sound to hail the rider, and didn't see Drawing Flame's taloned claws flash out and and cast the spell at him. He felt it, though, a kiss of ice along his spine, the muscles along his arms and legs suddenly immobile, as if wrapped in rigid steel. He was paralyzed. The great curse of paralysis, as the reader may be unfortunate enough to know, is that you continue to see and think even though your body does not respond. The thoughts that went through Scotty's mind was, damn. For drawing flame and furl of fresh leaves were, of course, like most simple day laborers in Black Marsh, accomplished illusionists, and no friend of the Imperial. The Argonians shoved Decemus Scotti to the side of the road just as the horse and rider came around the corner. He was an impressive figure, a nobleman in a flashing dark green cloak, the exact same color as his scaled skin, and a frilled hood that was part of his flesh and sat upon his head like a horned crown. "Greetings, brothers," the rider said to the two. "Greetings, Arkin Rightfoot Rock," they responded, and then Furl of Fresh Leaves added, "What is my lord's business on this fine day?" No rest, no rest, the Archean sighed regally. One of my she-workers gave birth to twins. Twins! Fortunately, there's a good trader in town for those, and she didn't put up too much of a fuss. Excuse me, what are you doing with these twins? And then there's a fool of an Imperial from Lord Venek's building commission I am supposed to meet with in Gideon. I'm sure he'll want the grand tour before he opens up the treasury for me. Such a lot of fuss. Drawing flame and furl of fresh leaves sympathized, and then, as Archean Rightfoot Rock rode off, they went to look for their hostage. Unfortunately for them, gravity being the same in Black Marsh as elsewhere in Tamriel, their hostage, Decemus Scotti, had continued to roll down from where they left him, and was at the moment in the Oncobra River, drowning. That's unfortunate. The Argonian Account, Book 4, the final book in the account. Decemus Scotti was drowning, and he didn't think much of it. He couldn't move his arms or his legs to swim because of the paralysis spell the Argonian peasant had lobbed at him. This is a very long-lasting spell. But he wasn't quite sinking. The Oncobra River was a crashing force of white water and currents that could carry along large rocks with ease, so Scotti tumbled head over heels, spinning, bumping, bouncing along. He figured that soon enough he would be dead, and that would be better than being in Black Marsh. He wasn't too panicked about it all when he felt his lungs fill with water, and cold blackness fell upon him. For a while, for the first time in some time, Decemus Scotti felt peace, blessed darkness, and then pain came to him, and he felt himself coughing, spewing water up from his belly and his lungs. A voice said, "Oh brother, he's alive, ain't he now?" Scotti wasn't quite sure if that were true, even when he opened his eyes and looked at the face above him. It was an Argonian, but unlike any he had seen anywhere. The face was thin and long, like a thick lance. The scales were ruby red, brilliant in the sunlight. It blinked at him, its eyelids opening and closing in vertical slits. "I don't suppose we should eat you, should we now?" The creature smiled, and Scotti could tell from its teeth that it was no idle suggestion. "Thank you," said Scotti weakly. He craned his head slightly to find out who the "we" were, and discovered he was on the muddy bank of the still sludgy river, surrounded by a group of Argonians with similarly needle-like faces, and a whole rainbow of scales. Bright greens and gem-like purples, blues and oranges. "Can you tell me, am I near, anywhere?" The ruby-colored Argonian laughed. "No, you're in the middle of everywhere, and near nowhere." "Oh," said Scotti, who grasped the idea that space did not mean much in Black Marsh. "And what are you?" "We are Agasefs," the ruby-colored Argonian replied. "My name is Nomu." Scotti introduced himself. "I'm a senior clerk in Lord Venek's building commission in the Imperial City. My job is to come here to try to fix the problems with commerce, but I've lost my agenda. Haven't met with any of my contacts, the Archeans of Gideon. Pompous, assimilated slaver kleptocrats," a small lemon-colored Agasef murmured with some feeling. "And now I just want to go home." Nomu smiled, his long mouth arcing up like a host happy to see an unwanted guest leave a party. "Shays will guide you." Shays, it seemed, was the bitter little yellow creature, and he was not at all pleased at the assignment. With surprising strength, he hoisted Scotti up, and for a moment the clerk was reminded of Gemellus dropping him into the bubbling muck that led to the underground express. Instead, Shays shoved Scotti toward a tiny little raft, razor thin, that bobbed on the surface of the water. "This is how you travel? We don't have the broken wagons and dying horses of our brothers on the outside," Shays replied, rolling his tiny eyes. "We don't know better." The Argonian sat at the back of the craft and used his whip-like tail to propel and navigate the craft. They traveled quickly around swirling pools of slime that stank of centuries of putrefaction, past pinnacled mountains that seemed sturdy but suddenly fell apart at the slightest ripple in the still water, under bridges that might have once been metal but were now purely rust. "Everything in Tamriel flows down to Blackmarsh," Shays said. As they slid through the water, Shays explained to Scotti that the Agacephs were one of the many Argonian tribes that lived in the interior of the province, near the Hist, finding little in the outside world worth seeing. He was fortunate to have been found by them. The Nagas, the toad-like Patru, and the winged Sarpa would have killed him on the spot. There were other creatures, too, to be avoided. Though there were few natural predators in inner Blackmarsh, the scavengers that rooted in the garbage seldom shied away from a living meal. Hack wings circled overhead, like the one Scotti had seen in the west. Shays fell silent and stopped the rafts completely, waiting for something. Scotti looked in the direction Shays was watching and saw nothing unusual in the filthy water. Then he realized that the pool of green slime in front of them was actually moving, and fairly quickly. From one bank to the other, it deposited small bones behind it as it oozed up into the reeds and disappeared. Voroplasm, Shays explained, moving the boat forward again. "Big word. It'll strip you to the bone by the second syllable." Okay. Scotti desirous. I feel desiring to distract himself from the sights and smells that surrounded him, thought it a good time to compliment his pilot on his excellent vocabulary. It was particularly impressive, given how far the civilization they were. The Argonians in the east did, in fact, speak so well. They tried to erect a temple of Mara near here in Umfolo 20 years ago, Shays explained, and Scotti nodded, remembering reading about it in the files before they were lost. They all perished quite dreadfully of swamp rot in the first month, but they left behind some excellent books. Scotti was going to inquire further when he saw something so huge, so horrifying, it made him stop, frozen. Half submerged in the water ahead was a mountain of spines, lying on 9-foot-long claws. White eyes stared blindly forward, and then suddenly the whole creature spasmed and lurked, the jaw of its mouth jutting out, exposing tusks clotted with gore. "Swamp Leviathan," Shays whistled, impressed. "Very, very dangerous." Scotti gasped, wondered why the Agaseph was so calm, and more, why he was continuing to steer the raft forward towards the beast. "Of all the creatures in the world, the rats are sometimes the worst," said Shays, and Scotti noticed that the huge creature was only a husk. Its movement was from the hundreds of rats that had burrowed into it, rapidly eating their way from the inside out, bursting from the skin in spots. "They are indeed," Scotti said, and his mind went to the Blackmarsh flies. To the Blackmarsh files, buried deep in the mud in 4 decades of imperial work in Blackmarsh. The two continued westward through the heart of Blackmarsh. Shays showed Scotti the vast, complicated ruins of the Catheringi capitals, fields of ferns and flowered grasses, quiet streams under canopies of blue moss, and the most astonishing sight of Scotti's life, the great forest of full-grown hist trees. They never saw a living soul until they arrived at the edge of the Imperial Commerce Road, just east of the Slow Point, where Malik, Scotti's Redguard guide, was waiting patiently. "I was going to give you 2 more minutes," the Redguard scowled, dropping the last of his food onto the pile at his feet. "No more, sir." Well, he's got fantastic timing then. The sun was shining bright when Decemus Scotti rode into the Imperial City. Wow, we're really jumping ahead a lot here. I don't know how this book's going to end, because he really didn't accomplish anything, but sure. and as it caught the morning dew, it lent a glisten to every building as if they had been newly polished for his arrival. It astonished him how clean the city was, and how few beggars there were. The protracted edifice of Lord Venek's building commission was the same as it had always been, but still the very sight of it seemed exotic and strange. It was not covered in mud. The people within actually generally worked. Lord Venek himself, though singularly squat and squinty, seemed immaculate, not only relatively clean of dirt and scabs, but also relatively uncorrupt. Scotti couldn't help but stare at him when he first caught sight of his boss. Venek stared right back. "You are a sight," the little fellow frowned. Did your horse drag you to Black Marsh and back? I would say go home and fix yourself, but there are a dozen people here to see you. I hope you have solutions for them." It was no exaggeration. Nearly 20 of Cyrodiil's most powerful and wealthiest people were waiting for him. Scotti was given an office even larger than Lord Venek's, and he met with each. First among the commission's clients were 5 independent traders, blustering and loaded with gold, demanding to know what Scotti intended to do about improving the trade routes. Scotti summarized for them the conditions of the main roads, the states of the merchants' caravans, the sunken bridges, and all the other impediments between the frontier and the marketplace. They told him to have everything replaced and repaired, and gave him the gold necessary to do it. Within 3 months, the bridge at Slow Point had disappeared into the muck, the great caravan had collapsed into decrepitude, and the main road from Gideon had been utterly swallowed up by swamp water. The Argonians began once again to use the old ways, their personal rafts and sometimes the underground express to transport the grain in small quantities. It took a third of the time, 2 weeks, to arrive in Cyrodiil, none of it rotten. The Archbishop of Mara was the next client Scotti met with, a kind-hearted man, horrified by the tales of Argonian mothers selling their children into slavery. Oh, that's what they were doing with the twins, huh? Oh, goddamn. He pointedly asked Scotti if it were true. "Sadly, yes," Scotti replied, and the Archbishop showered him with septims, telling the clerk that food must be brought to the province to ease their suffering, and the schools must be improved so they could learn to help themselves. Wow, what a imperialistic mindset on that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, actually, no, I mean, the Imperials never actually had any slaves, so, yeah, alright, fair enough. Within 5 months, the last book had been stolen from the desecrated Maran monastery in Umphalo. As the Archaeans went bankrupt, their slaves returned to his parents' tiny farms. The backwater Argonians found that they could grow enough to feed their families provided they had enough hard workers in their enclave, and the buyer's market for slaves sharply declined. Ambassador Slakith, concerned about the rising crime in northern Black Marsh, brought with him the contributions of many other expatriate Argonians like himself. They wanted more Imperial guards on the border at Slow Point, more magical lit lanterns posted along the main roads at regular intervals, more patrol stations, and more schools built to allow young Argonians to better themselves and not turn to crime. Within 6 months, there were no more Nagas roaming the roads, as there were no merchants traveling them to rob. The thugs returned to the fetid inner swamps, where they felt much happier. Their constitutions enriched by the rot and pestilence that they loved. Stakisith and his constituency were so pleased by the crime rate dropping, they brought even more gold to Decemus Scotti, telling him to keep up the good work. How does, I thought it was, because of just how difficult the terrain was that they couldn't do this stuff, but now apparently they're just going in and fucking fixing it, oh, okay, we need to fix this, that's all. I figured Decemus would have some more actual work to do here, but okay, sure. Black Marsh simply is, and always shall be unable to sustain a large-scale cash crop plantation economy. The Argonians and anyone else, the whole of Black Marsh, could live in Black Marsh on subsistence farming, just raising what they needed. That was not sad, Scotti thought. That was hopeful. Scotty's solution to each of their dilemmas had been the same. 10% of the gold they gave him went to Lord Vnek's building commission. The rest, Scotti kept for himself, and did exactly nothing about the requests. What a fucking asshole. Within a year, Decemus Scotti had embezzled enough to retire very comfortably, and Blackmarsh was better off than it had been in 40 years. A man who can go to a place and realize, hey, they know what the fuck they're doing, and they don't need any fucking assistance. And, can also just take some money for himself, and fucking embezzle however much gold. Probably a very good amount of money, huh? But Blackmarsh has never been better. And, yeah, okay. It's, every city needs something different. Some people just need to be left the fuck alone. And apparently that's the case for Blackmarsh, which also gets me very excited for a Blackmarsh game. But that'll probably never happen. But anyway, yeah, so that's going to do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to go steal all of the valuables from Coral, and then in the video after that, we'll continue reading some other stories. But until then, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and goodbye.
I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you. Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you.